Hey everybody, Doug Passon coming to you from Studio 3553 in Scottsdale, Arizona. We are now like 30 episodes into Set for Sentencing. I am so grateful that we are finding an audience and that people are finding value in the podcast in and out of the legal community. It occurs to me, though, that after these 30 episodes, there hasn't been one solely focused on me and the work that I do. And I know that I've been sprinkling sort of my take on sentencing and my take on story and my take on sentencing videos all through these 30 episodes, but I thought it was high time for me to focus directly on the work that I love. And you can call them defense documentaries, you can call them mitigation movies, but really at the heart of it is crafting compelling case narratives. In other words, you don't get to the movie part until you work on the story part. So I'm going to share with you a couple of podcast episodes that I have been a guest on in the recent several years, because I thought that would be better than just sitting here and talking at you about all the things that I do. So today, the first episode that I want to share with you is from my story guru, mentor, friend, colleague, Dr. Randy Olson, who I co-wrote the Narrative Gym for Law with. He had me on his podcast called ABT Time to talk about the ABT. What is the ABT? It stands for and, but, and therefore. And it is the most powerful narrative model I have ever encountered in my entire life. So that's going to be this week's podcast. I hope you dig it. It's going to give you a chance to learn more about me, what makes my heart sing, and what I do. It's also going to give me a chance to relax a little bit in the month of December, because I'm going to be recycling some other folks' amazing content. So I wanted to say thank you to Randy Olson for sharing your work with me and my audience, and I hope you enjoy this episode of me on ABT Time.
Hello, everybody. Happy holidays, and welcome to the 30th episode of the ABT Time podcast. Most podcasts don't make it past 20 episodes. We are now breaking through the 30 barrier. And let's begin by having our co-host, Jen Martin from Melbourne, Australia, join us. Good morning, Jen. How is everything this morning? Monday morning, I believe. Is that what it is? Well, no.
Tuesday. No, I think it's
morning.
Tuesday morning. Who knows? It's the week before Christmas. My kids are on holidays. Who knows? It's sometime.
Wonderful.
Lovely to see you, Randy, and congratulations, 30 episodes. I was once told a statistic that something like 80% of podcasts only ever make one episode because they make one and discover that it's just too much hard work. So to get to 30, that's something to be proud of.
Yes, we have killed ourselves in the making of this podcast. As everybody knows, there's so much effort that goes into it, clearly. No, it's been wonderful and everything's going good. And the ABT course is done for this year. We finished our 19th round last week with the Smithsonian Tropical Research Institute. And now we get a little bit of a breather. And then next month, we have got 3, probably 4 rounds that we will be launching. It's pure insanity. Wow. And we also have a long waiting list now, a bunch of different organizations that probably the next batch will launch in March. We have lined up rounds, 2021, 22, and 23, which will be East Carolina University for 20, National Park Service for 21, 22 will be split between National Park Service and postdocs at Cornell University, I think from their Sustainability Institute. And then if there's one more, I'm in discussions with Pfizer and their epidemiology group. I did a workshop with them a couple weeks ago. They totally got it. And so I think that's going to come together. So yeah, we continue.
That's awesome.
And
what a diverse group of organizations to all be recognizing the power of narrative. It's just amazing.
That's kind of the key word at the center of everything, because the ABT is such a universal communications tool. It results in all this diversity, as we know, which that's a perfect little entree into today's guest and topic. Thank you very much for setting us up. So
My pleasure. That's why you pay me the big bucks.
The big bucks. You just know how to, all of your improv training, you know how to cue these things as we go along. And so what's taken place is we did the Narrative Gym book a year ago. I published that in November of last year. Came out as kind of emerged from the course. And then my good friend Park Howell, who will hopefully join us towards the end of this session, who's the guy from the business world in the course, has been part from the very beginning. Every single round he's given one of the sessions. And he looked at the Narrative Gym book earlier this year and said, nice book, but my business people aren't going to buy that book unless it has the word business on the cover. And that's exactly what we set to work on, was that he and I collaborated on a revision of the book, a second version that has the word business on the cover. It says the Narrative Gym for Business. And that one, we revised the first and last chapter. So I had him add content into especially the last chapter, 5 applications, ABT to the business world. We got that one out in, I think, September, and everybody seemed to really be enjoying that and going for it. It's gotten a lot of exposure on websites throughout the business advertising world. And right about that time, our guest today, Doug Passon, had been a guest on Park's podcast, The Business of Story, and had talked with him about the idea of, that he'd been using the ABT for a while in his training of lawyers. Doug is a longtime defense lawyer, and that he had huge value and respect for the ABT framework. And so wondered if there might be some way he could join the party. And sure enough, we ended up, now he and I have done the same thing for law. So that version just came out about 3 days ago. It's on Amazon. And that one is the same deal. And Doug came up with this wonderful opening application of the ABT to the world of law. And then also did the same thing, wrote the last chapter, 5 applications more generally to the world of law. And in fact, you know what, the opening of the book is about this example that he realized about Miranda rights in the United States. And it's the very first paragraph, starts right in on it. And I think it really hooks people. And so I'm going to use that to start the whole discussion with Doug before we even get into his background as a lawyer and everything else. So on that note, Doug, how about if you join us? And before we get into all the pleasantries and everything else, let's just take off at breakneck speed and tell us about the relevance of the ABT to Miranda rights.
All right. Thank you so much for having me. Thank you for not just having me on the podcast, but having me in your life. Because I realize it may not always be the most pleasant experience for you, but I'm so glad to be here and to be able to collaborate on the book. So you want me to dig into Miranda. So it was just, I think maybe we were going back and forth about examples that people could relate to in the legal world. And Miranda is an example that everybody can relate to, but every lawyer certainly knows about it. And people have seen a million cop shows, and the light went off. Because when you think about the Miranda rights that we've all heard over and over and over again, it's all and material. And when we talk about the ABT, one of the things that for lawyers that is so attractive about ABT is the problem solution dynamic. Lawyers are here to solve problems. The ABT helps us identify the problem and then build a narrative around to solve it. Well, what is one of the biggest problems that criminal defense lawyers like myself experience in the law? And that is that every single client always talks to the police, even though the police have sat them down. They've read them their Miranda rights because they're constitutionally obligated to do that. And they go, okay, and then spill their guts. Like, I could count on maybe one or two hands. I've been practicing law 25 years, and I could barely have cases where clients said, no, thank you, please, yes, a lawyer, that would be great. They don't do it. And the question is why? And I'm sure it's not a completely simplistic explanation, but I think a big part of it is because the ABT, the Miranda rights, which are the most important rights a person could receive at the most important moment, are delivered in the very least persuasive way. You have the right to remain silent, and you have the right to a lawyer, and anything you say can and will be used against court. And if you can't afford a lawyer, it wouldn't be rep. It's all and. It's all and we know from our own experience that when we live in the non-narrative world of and, it's in one ear and out the other. And so I think the light went off when we realized that. And there's probably a whole other debate we could have for another day about whether it's intentional, that's designed to be sort of not very persuasive, because let's face it, police are really not in the business of trying to convince you not to talk with them, right? They're doing their job. They want to get to it, right? And so they do this thing and that's it. So we sort of posited, what would it be like if these rights were delivered in ABT form? Would it have more of an impact to basically tell the story to a person who's accused of a crime or a suspected of a crime, who's in that tiny little interrogation room with that officer in a uniform, maybe with a gun, and their world is freezing and they don't know which way to turn and what to do. And they're nervous already if they delivered that in ABT form. And so what did we do? I have the book right here. So what would it look like? You have the right to remain silent and the right to a lawyer. But if you do choose to speak to the police, anything you say can and will be used against you in court. Therefore, you should not speak to law enforcement without first talking to a lawyer. Now, that's never going to happen, but
I was just picturing a movie when that happens. What would be the next step?
Right. And if we had a police officer on this podcast, he'd laugh in my face right now. But the truth is that would be probably a lot more persuasive than the other way around.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Sorry, I was going to say, Doug, do you think the status quo, which you described at the beginning, which is the and then the person speaks and tells a story, is that even more evidence of the power of narrative? Because this person who, as you say, is sitting there, their world is freezing, they're more stressed than they've ever been before. It's a terrible experience for them. And they go back to this human instinct of wanting to tell a story. So they start talking, even if they're talking to the wrong person, because they're talking to the police rather than to their lawyer.
Yeah. Definitely. First of all, it's the power of non-narrative. It's because they understand that if you want to exert power over someone, you want to achieve a result, then non-narrative in this instance is the way to do it. But can I go one step further and talk to you about the mechanism that law enforcement uses to get you to confess to? So telling you your rights and getting you to start talking is the other thing, but then it's, what are you going to say when you do talk? And the police are trained in a very specific method of getting people to confess to crimes. It's called the Reed technique. And if you look at the Reed technique, it is ABT. It is ABT, and it goes something like this. We know you're a really good guy, and there's probably a really good explanation for what happened, but we've got your DNA, we've got your fingerprints, we've got 6 eyewitnesses. By the way, that's all lies. The Supreme Court says we get to lie to people in an interrogation. But we've got you nailed dead to rights. If you want to have the judge have any leniency on you, you better admit to what you did. Therefore, talk to us right now. And that's how they get people to confess to crimes, even crimes they did not commit. We have an Innocence Project in the United States, and they've tracked wrongful convictions based on DNA exonerations, and something like 25% of those wrongful convictions, the person confessed to a crime they didn't commit. That's the power of narrative right there. And so they know when to use narrative and they know when to use non-narrative.
It is amazing. And you sent that to me on a Sunday morning, innocently saying, I think I've come across something interesting here. What do you think? And then I went insane. And I said, I think this might be the very best example to date of application of the ABT. I mean, there's so much to it. And in some ways, maybe our best example to date has been the Gettysburg Address, to look at the 3-part structure of that and see that it absolutely mirrors ABT structure. But this one has got these deeper dimensions, as you say. And the more you look at it, the more you realize And as you've said to me, it's well established that there's been a 50-year tradition of downplaying the Miranda rights, delivering them in ways that make sure that they aren't very effective. And what there hasn't been any sort of awareness of narrative structure, how important it is. And just to take a moment and draw a parallel to my journey in the science world, which is 10 years ago, let's see, 2013, 8 years ago is when I gave the TED Med talk, which was kind of the first substantial audience I really reached with the ABT. And in that talk, very simply, I said there's these two basic modes. There's the non-narrative and then here's the ABT. And what happened was lots of scientists writing to me saying, no one has ever pointed this out to me. I've written and given talks over the years and thought I was doing a good enough job. Now that I look at them all, they're and what I always say, it's not that and is wrong. It's just that it's lacking that problem solution dynamic that could make it into something that works really well. And it's the same thing with the Miranda rights. It's not that the Miranda rights are wrong. It's just that they don't have that structure to actually make them function in the way that they're supposed to be meant to function. And putting it into getting this realization that our brains are built around this problem solution dynamic is where it all begins. When you begin to realize that, then you go back and look at the Miranda rights and say, all right, if we know that people's brains function in this problem solution mode, how are we presenting this as a problem for them and then offering up advice in the form of a solution to it? And they aren't. And so that's what ends up happening exactly, is that the brain isn't activated by it. As you said, it's just and okay. All right, now I'm going to tell you my whole story. It is so cut and dried. And I hope that we can get some interest and traction on this. We're certainly very slowly getting traction on the ABT framework in general with all these different books that we're putting together now, reaching into different disciplines. And each one of them's got a little bonfire going. And by the way, the next one will be in January, where we've finished that one. We'll come out with it on January 4th on the topic of politics. I've co-authored that with Dave Gold, who's a longtime Democratic Party strategist, and equally well-written and powerful in the examples there. But getting back to law, tell us about the subtitle of this book and give us some context on that.
So about persuasive advocacy.
Yes.
That's what we do. It doesn't matter what. So I'm a criminal defense lawyer, which of course carries all the connotations behind it and whatever. But the truth is, it doesn't matter what kind of lawyer you are. You're here to A, solve problems, and B, persuade, and that's how we solve the problem. So I don't care if you're in court or if you're a transactional attorney, if you're just sending an email, whatever it is, communication in narrative form is the way to do this. Now, the problem is we lawyers are never taught anything about narrative storytelling, period. And eventually we figure out along the way that story is important in our communications, but then nobody ever teaches how to do it. And so, and to correct a minor correction to the preface on the intro was when I hadn't been teaching lawyers the ABT method. I had been teaching lawyers story based on the years of, I make documentary films inside court, outside of court. I've been swimming in story for 20 years. I've read every book on the subject. So my mission has been to try to impart story structure to lawyers for years upon years. And I would get an hour and I would talk about Joseph Campbell and I would talk about McKee and I'd talk about action is character and character is action. And I'd be having a really good time. And I think it was entertaining to the lawyers, but I doubt they took away a whole lot when they walked out of the room. And so when I discovered Randy and the ABT, I said, holy crap, this is finally the way. Can I say crap on this podcast?
No, we've got very tight censorship rules here. We're going to have to bleep that out.
I think you already did, Doug. So
I did. And I did it twice. I doubled down.
Yeah, you did.
I immediately recognized that as a way that you could very easily help people who don't have a history and a grasp on story structure to get it right out of the gate. It doesn't mean it's going to be easy for them right out of the gate, but it's a way for them to wrap their head around what we mean by narrative structure right off the gate. And so I'm that's why I wanted to partner up, write this book, and sort of spread the gospel, the ABT. So now I'm going forth into the world, and everything is built. Nothing in legal storytelling makes sense except in the light of ABT. That's going to be that's my mantra from here going forward. But that's how we persuade. That's how we solve our clients' problems and convince the other side to do what we need them to do.
And the subtitle of the law version of the Narrative Gym book is Introducing the ABT Framework for Persuasive Advocacy. Yeah. And that was, that took a little bit of effort on our parts. We went back and forth on what exactly to give it as the subtitle.
I think, by the way, my biggest struggle was the introducing part, because as a lawyer, I want to go really deep and like case examples. And my book, this 100-page book, was turning into a 1,000-page book. Randy's like, easy does it now, dude. Just slow your roll for a second. So, well, I'm already working on volume 2, by the way. But
no, Randy won't let you do that, Doug. But Doug, it's interesting hearing you, because your story with the ABT parallels mine exactly. But whereas my job was trying to teach scientists how to communicate and how to tell stories, and scientists constantly get told, you need to tell a story, and they're like, what does that mean? Once upon a time there was a little girl who studied neurons, and so I was doing the same. I was talking about Campbell. I was trying to not just impart this advice. Yes, I agree, the neuroscience, the research is clear, we do need to tell stories. I was trying to find a way that was digestible and accessible to my students for them to tell stories, and exactly as you did. Then I came across the ABT and I saw the light and went, okay, this is it. This is a formula that these students will listen to, they will get, they will learn how to use, they will take away. And then eventually, my paths also directly crossed with Randy, and exactly the same. And I know Randy and I completely agree on this, that, people talk all about science communication, and that's my job, right? So I have to kind of own the name, but equally science isn't special, just like law isn't special. We all just operate in our little silos. We have jargon that we can use happily with one another, but as soon as we need to communicate more broadly, we have to recognize that we do operate in our little specialized worlds, whether it's law, whether it's engineering, whether it's science, whatever it is. Narrative is central to all of us being able to do our jobs well. There is no special thing about any of our silos other than recognizing we hang out with each other when we work. Good communication is good communication.
And exactly on that point, back 8 years ago, I put together this initial workshop called Connection Storymaker Workshop with Brian Palermo, who's our longtime collaborator, and with another expert from Hollywood, Dory Barton, who is a script consultant. And really, she taught me a lot on narrative structure that really got me going. I really wasn't tuned into Joseph Campbell that well until I listened to her talk about him. And one of the things that happened early on, she was both an actor and a screenwriter. She had no background in science. We brought both she and Brian in to work with the science world. And she gave me this. Well, in the beginning, I said to her, okay, here's the deal. You've got the Hollywood storytelling thing down. That's really great. But you need to understand science is this very different world, and that scientists have a different way of communicating, yada, yada, yada. And she said to me this thing at the beginning. She said, okay, you're welcome to say that, but I think with time, you're going to come to realize, dude, it's all the same story. And that was a little catchphrase that over the next year and a half, we'd have these moments where I'd begin to see it like, oh my God, you're right. Look at this MRAD template, how they write their papers in the science world. That's just the same thing as 3-act structure in, writing a play or whatever. And I began to go back to her and say, your old catchphrase, dude, it's all the same story. I'm beginning to see it. I'm beginning to get it. You're absolutely right. Which is where we are now. Here we have a lawyer. Dude, it's all the same story. You're in here talking about the ABT. We have Park Howell from the business world. We have Dave Gold from the political world. Dude, it's all the same story. One of the sad things was when I wrote the Houston We Have a Narrative book, I told about that. And I used that little catchphrase several times in there and had some fun with it, circling back. And here we are again. Dude, it's all the same story. These moments of realization. Well, when the book came out, there were at least 3 scientists with blogs. This has started some of my rage back to some of these people in the science world. There were at least 3 scientists with blogs who ripped into that phrase. Oh, this is Randy trying to show how cool he is, using the word dude. They did not understand the context of what I was talking about. They didn't understand anything. That book flew over the head of so many scientists, and some of them have slowed down a bit enough to start to listen and digest it. And I've had warfare for, 6-7 years with a lot of them. And I don't care at this point. I'm going off into other disciplines. We're going into law, into politics, and all these other disciplines, in business in a big way. And eventually, our mission now, as I say to all the people in our group, we're building Mount ABT, and we're going to make it so damn big that a lot of these scientists are going to finally look up and see the shadow that's being cast on them from Mount ABT, and they're going to be forced to finally understand, oh, wow, the way we communicate is the same as these other disciplines. But in the meanwhile, there's this ongoing thing, and I'm constantly pointing this out about the term science communication. It really needs to be communication of science, communication of law, communication. It's all these same core principles, which then leads us back to this book. In one of those sections we put in there at the beginning, this kind of fun was, what did we title it? A Tale of Three Out of the Boxers. And we should have included you, Jen, could have made it 4 out of the boxers, meaning that all 4 of us have had that same journey. We all fell in love with the Joseph Campbell, the hero's journey, with the 12 stages and all those kinds of things in the beginning. And it's just mesmerizing. Oh, look at all this complexity. You tell your own story, filling in the blanks, yada, yada. And then we all began to hit that realization, like, that's nice, but nobody's picking this stuff up when you try and teach it to them. You're dazzling them with complexity for a day, and they go away learning nothing. And then the ABT begins to settle in, like, wait a second, this is the real tool. And it goes on and on. And that was my journey. That was Park's journey. And now it's been Doug's journey. So pick it up from there, Doug, with some more details on that.
When you're talking about business, you're saying, I've got this great product and it's going to save your life. It's going to change your world. And if you're talking about politics, I've got this amazing candidate who's going to turn everything around. So there's this inherent excitement and emotion. But for law, we are taught at the early stage: issue, rule, application, conclusion. So what's the issue? What are the facts? How's the law? How do you apply the law to the facts? And don't get too excited about anything. And nobody ever talks about telling a story in the world. We read in law school, we read every day cases, and we dissect them. Well, what was the issue here? And what is the legal rule? And how did the court apply that rule? Never once saying, hey, guess what? There's a human being in this case who had a steel girder drop on his head. And he's, there's a human being in every single legal case. And we are taught to strip the humanity out of it so that there's no room for storytelling in that process. And I feel like maybe that's science too. This is my theory, my hypothesis. Yeah. So I think we're maybe further down the road in the law, especially for litigation lawyers, because if you do take like a trial advocacy class, somebody might tell you about it's important to tell the story of the case, but they're not going to know how, to tell you. But most of the people, when I give talks and I ask them, raise your hand, how many people are ever taught about storytelling in law school? There's not one hand that goes up. And it's the main thing we do.
Yeah, let me toss in a parallel there. Even more so than science is doctors in medicine. And, every parent wants their child to grow up to be a doctor or lawyer. And there's a parallel there because the training of doctors dehumanizes them. This is an age-old thing. And last year, I was given the John P. McGovern Award from the American Medical Writers Association. And in the talk that I gave there, I read up a bunch about William Osler. And he was a guy in the late 1800s who began the whole idea of medical residencies for doctors, because he began to see in the training of doctors exactly what you're talking about, which was that the doctors have to learn so much information, they start to turn into robots that don't even care about their patients. They're in there talking over the patient is, half awake, and the doctors are all talking robotically with each other with an absence of humanity. And he began the whole program in the late 1800s of residencies to force these doctors to get down in the trenches and get to know human beings and humanize this sort of stuff. And it's that exact same process, which is the training involves so much information that you dehumanize the actual person. And then you have to figure out a way to bring them back to the human world for them to be effective. And so they've been through that same sort of thing. And I had a short article last year in Scientific American about applying the ABT to humanize medicine, because it's the same thing. And that's exactly what you're talking about. So yeah, keep going on that thread.
Well, there's another problem for me, which is in the criminal system. It's not just our training and the dehumanization that goes along there, but the system is designed to dehumanize. If you go to my website, DougPassonLaw.com. There's a 1-minute video right on the homepage. And Randy, I think you saw this as one of the reasons you maybe understood that I might be a good partner. That's what I'm talking about. We especially in the federal system, we reduce a client to a chart of numbers. It's a what is the offense level and what is the criminal history, and you plug in the numbers, and that spits out a sentence, which is years and years and years of a person's life. And
a sentence meaning not
like a prison sentence.
Yeah,
like a prison sentence. Yeah, punishment. Right. So we're determining a punishment in prison of years upon years based on a chart of numbers that some bureaucrats in Washington came up with, and it's kind of obscene, and because these are each one who may have done something horrible, may have made a terrible mistake, but they're still human beings. And people want to say, let the punishment fit the crime. And I say, no, let the punishment fit the person, right? And that we know from Brian Stevenson and Sister Helen Prejean and all the greats of the criminal justice world that a person should not be judged by their worst mistake in life. They should be judged by the totality of their life story, right? So that we can get a full picture of the human being.
And then that's what you've specialized in with your sentencing videos. And so just a few words of background. When I first met Doug, one of the first things he did was sent me a half an hour long video he had done for, I think it was really a sex offender, wasn't it? A sex offender who was autistic. And there was a much more complicated story there behind the offenses that this young man had done. And Doug's been doing this for a number of years, producing these videos, which are fascinating videos in that they're not super glossy. They're very small scale productions. And we talked about this, and they sort of have to be, because if you make them super glossy, there's a level of trust that starts to go out the window. Like, oh, this is a Hollywood team came in and told this whole story. And so he makes these things that are very honest and simple and straightforward, that present the basic perspectives and some of the other people that know the person who's being sentenced, and they become a tool to try and get a deeper understanding of the person who needs to be punished, but needs the punishment to be the right measure. And you've built a reputation from that. And tell us a little bit about, you were written up in the New York Times once or twice, and then tell us all about The Simpsons. Go for it.
Yeah. So fundamentally, it all starts with a narrative. So, every case we're going to tell the story of the human being behind the mistake. But some cases are better shown, not told, because, movie is story told with pictures. And sometimes you have to tell that visually. And that's how I got into making these short documentaries for cases. And, in our system, in the federal system, quite often the first time a judge ever lays eyes on the human being that they're about to sentence to prison is the day of sentencing. They've never sat with them, never met with them. And I always say, in an ideal world, you'd bring the judge out of the courtroom to the living room of my client or my client's family and sit with them and hear the stories and learn what kind of a person this really is.
Wait a second. Let me ask a question clarifying on that. I mean, don't you end up with a trial where the judge sitting there looking at the person on a daily basis?
Well, that's a whole nother podcast, but 90+% of cases do not go to trial. They plead. Our system is set up to be very coercive in terms of.
Look, I'm sorry, but my only exposure to the legal world is Dateline, and every episode of Dateline, they certainly are in a courtroom. Therefore, I'm under the impression that every offense goes to trial.
But here's the thing: so almost no cases go to trial. But what is a trial? A trial is the prosecution telling their story about your client. And a lot of times lawyers don't understand that you have to tell your own story. They just try to poke holes in that and create reasonable doubt. And reasonable doubt only takes you so far. You have to tell an alternative story. But most of the time, a trial is the defendant sitting quietly at a table while everybody else talks about them. Yeah. And the jury silently judging every little micro move they make. And it's Shirley's Law. Right? Because
I was just going to bring that up. Tell us what Shirley's Law is.
Shirley's Law is if you don't take control of the narrative, someone else is going to tell that story and you're not going to like how it turns out. Well, every minute of every hour of a trial, that jury's formulating a story in their mind about who your client is. And it may be because you reacted, you didn't show him. Look at Kyle Rittenhouse. He cried on the stand. And so the jury got to tell, that was taking control of the narrative, I would argue, assuming it wasn't spontaneous, but we'll leave that. But the point is, like, there's a story there. He feels really bad about what happened. That's why he's crying, But so most of the time the defendant doesn't testify. Okay, we saw it in Rittenhouse, great, and I think a person should testify when they can, but they're going up against a seasoned lawyer who's going to rip them to shreds on cross. So the point is, a lot of times, even when it does go to trial, the jury doesn't really get to hear much of anything from a defendant, and they're just going to make their own story in their head about everything.
And so then why did they talk about you in the New York Times and had that lead to The Simpsons?
Well, so I've been in a lot of major publications, but the New York Times was interesting because it was actually in the op doc section. So there's a short movie about what I do. And interestingly, they wove in this training. It's a whole other story about this filmmaker who completely deceived me and manipulated me to get access to the things that I teach lawyers. But the long and short of it is, they did this piece about sentencing videos, and they also I said, I won't let you film the process of making a video, but if you want to film a teaching session, go ahead. So they came, and I was teaching Joseph Campbell in The Hero's Journey, and they made great fun about that. Like, oh, look at these lawyers trying to use Hollywood and Joseph Campbell to try to manipulate the jury. So they put a spin on it it's just so routine. It's such a pat criticism. And as Simpsons, as much as I love The Simpsons with every fiber of my being, they did the same thing because they made an episode about what I do. And in that episode, Mr. Burns, who of course is a billionaire, gets in trouble, and he has Guillermo del Toro come in and make his sentencing video. And the takeaway is that this is a thing that rich people can do to get themselves out of trouble.
Okay, wait. So you got to tell us about your experience with you met with.
Yeah, I want to hear all about it.
That's what we're here to listen to.
Okay, so
when was this first off?
It's maybe two-ish years ago. I'm sitting on the kitchen table on a Sunday night watching The Simpsons, as is my ritual that I've been doing since I was 18 years old when The Simpsons first started. I'm 51, right?
It's a lot of seasons.
I saw the original Simpsons episode. It was a Christmas episode, and my world was turned upside down. Now, this is before South Park, before Family Guy, before we had all those things. And I was a Flintstones fan, and that's all we had. And then The Simpsons came along, and I was like, holy shit, this is what I've been waiting for my whole life. And of course, The Simpsons are famous for taking on institutions. We make fun of politics. We make fun of education, all of it, right? So I'm watching The Simpsons. Homer, it's season 30. So we're 30 years down the road. Episode 15, it's called 101 Mitigations. Homer gets arrested for joyriding, and he's about to face sentencing. And Lisa's helping out, as she's wont to do, and she's Googling, and she says, oh, wow, I just found this thing called sentencing mitigation videos that lawyers use to humanize their clients. I almost fell off my stool. I swear to you, I almost passed out. And my wife was there. I'm like, Rachel, I didn't think. So my world is spinning because I'm seeing my favorite show about my whole life lampoon my life's work. So it was like a mixture of like terror and bliss, all like, I didn't know what to make of it, but it was awesome. And afterwards, my mind starts going, I'm like, how do they know about this? There's only a small handful of people in this world that do what I do. I mean, it's a new thing, right? And I had the New York Times thing was about a year old, and I'm like, it's probably from the New York Times, whatever. And so I set about on a mission to try to find the writer of the episode and figure it out. And I finally tracked him down through some contacts and through in LA and everything else. And I sent this gushing fanboy email, and I didn't expect to hear anything back from anybody except maybe like a knock on the door to serve a restraining order. But within an hour, I got this amazing, sweet email from the writer of the episode, one of the writers, Rob Lazebnik. And he said, I had to go back to my big book of ideas, because when I get an idea, I write it in there. And I said, and it takes a year to make an episode, so he didn't remember. And he said, I went back and I pulled out an article that featured your work. And he said, so yeah, you can say that you helped inspire this episode. And then he said, by the way, if you're ever in LA, come to a table read with the cast. And so I was like, how's tomorrow? So
I'm booking my flight right now. See you tomorrow.
I have 2 boys, 17 and 13 now. They were probably a couple of years younger, and they don't think anything I do is cool usually ever. But when they were in a room, a small conference room, sitting around a table with the cast of The Simpsons, listening to them read that script, that was cool. That was cool. Yeah. So yeah, that's my Simpsons stories. But that's how you know that this is actually becoming a thing, if The Simpsons are doing an episode about it, right?
That's amazing. Well, one of the little experiences you and I had once we got going on the writing of this was that and Park I guess is not back with us, and I need to talk about this delicately, so it's not castigating him, but the business world is not a bunch of heavy duty critical thinkers. And, all these things, there's a plus and a minus to everything, upside, downside. What I found with him in the business world, and he and I ran a round of the ABT framework course with 25 business people who are great in their own separate way, but they're not intense critical thinkers. They're better on the other side of the spectrum, which is they're good with all the energy and the positivity and the enthusiasm, and they just sit there cranking out, oh my God, this is awesome, this is great. They're not thinking real critically as they're cranking out all that enthusiasm. And so as a result, the business version of the book is stronger on positive energy and not quite so detail oriented. And then as Doug and I started to work on the law version, he sent me a long memo of, here's a whole bunch of little things I found in the business version that really, could use some tightening up, not quite as critical. And then we began these discussions and began to realize that there's actually a lot of similarity in the mindset of the lawyer versus the scientist. Both are very detail oriented, more concerned about getting all these details right than about humanizing things and having tons of energy and enthusiasm. And the business world is the other end of the spectrum. And then I'm digging deeper and working a little bit with Dave Gold on the politics version of the book. I begin to realize that's a little bit more towards the business end as well. So we end up with these 4 disciplines. At one end of the spectrum is this highly critical approach of scientists and lawyers. And at the other end is this higher energy approach of business and politics. And that end isn't so concerned about the fine details. The science and law end isn't so concerned about humanizing things. And that ends up being my large scale perspective, looking from doing these 4 books at these 4 different professions across that spectrum. Does that match up with your perception, Doug, pretty much?
Yeah, and the issue of Hollywood is what really makes the lawyers bristle, and that's what the New York Times sort of
as it does with scientists.
That's
as it does with scientists. Exactly
the same.
Yeah. And you don't get that for sure with business people, and you don't really get it with people in the world of politics. They're thrilled.
Well, that's because people in business and politics are absolutely upfront that their job is to convince and persuade. Whereas if you're a lawyer or a scientist, the facts should speak for themselves. The evidence should be clear. Yeah. We shouldn't have to bring in persuasiveness, right? Even though, of course, we all know you have to. It's the facts should be enough. I mean, it's a really clear divide. What interests me, Randy, is can you think of any professions that you reckon would fall in the middle? Is there a group out there that you haven't worked with yet that you think would not be one of those extremes, or do we all end up on one of those extremes?
What do you think? Can you think of a profession that falls in the middle?
I don't know. I'm not sure, but it's worth thinking about, isn't it?
It is worth thinking about. I think it's the goal of all the professions is to find their way to the middle. And so they end up, kind of trying to work on that sort of stuff. And it's
how about psychologists?
Oh boy.
So they're in the science world, but I was just working. Have you ever heard of psychodrama? It's where it's a method of therapy where you assume a role of someone else and help them understand their perspective and tell the story from their perspective. So there's a deep storytelling element involved in psychology in a way. I mean, it's a science discipline. I don't know.
Yeah, I this we could do an entire episode on this. For example, in film school, one of our instructors just said to us, don't put dream sequences into your movies. Dream sequences aren't based in reality. They've got limitless possibilities to go turn into spaghetti of all these different sorts of things that don't have any meaning to them. And that's the risk of psychology. Is
May I carve out an exception to that rule?
Certainly.
The big Lebowski.
Exactly. And those are dream sequences for entertainment purposes, but not for advancing dramatic narrative and story points and things like that. No, and I love dream sequences, but as a general rule, they're not grounded in reality. But that goes on that psychology tends to not be. But let's get back to our book, which is, and in fact, we're going to go about 10 more minutes, and then even though we're kind of hitting full stride, we're going to call it quits, because I'm going to bring you back in a month, Doug, after the book's been out there for a while, and you've got some things to say about what all the responses are. Actually, so far, what have you been getting for? We haven't hardly released it. What is it? Got 6 reviews so far on Amazon, and you just had a few friends read it. What sorts of things have you heard?
I think we're up to 7 reviews.
Oh wow!
Honestly.
Yeah. Okay.
We just got one.
Yeah.
But it was actually from my friend Nora Gruber, who does sentencing mitigation video, and she did, full disclosure, Doug Passon and I teach mitigation film production, but she's the one that said, sorry if I'm calling her out, but she'll never hear this. Well, she might. I'll make her listen. But she teaches lawyers like I do, and she'll say, "What's the story? Tell me." Lawyers really want to talk about storytelling, but when you ask them what is the thing, what is the one thing that you're trying to accomplish here, what's your big problem, they're at a loss. They don't know where to start. And so that part really resonated with her right off the bat. She sent me an email about and quoting that part of our book, which was, "This happens about half the time with participants in the ABT build exercise in our course. They're sitting on top of a mountain of information. They have a great deal of expertise, and yet when you ask them to boil it down to a central problem they're pursuing, the faraway gaze sets in." And one of the ways I've completely transformed my practice when I consult with lawyers on helping them craft the narrative is that's where I start. What is the big problem that we need to solve?
Yeah.
Because there's a big problem, which is my client got convicted of this crime and he's about to be sentenced. Okay, fine. But what is the real issue here that we need to tackle?
Yeah.
And when you ask them that, they don't know.
That is so good. And what's so strong at this point about the ABT framework, which is we're in a very different place now than 2 years ago. When the pandemic set in, we were still doing our story circles, and we just didn't know that much about the deeper dimensions of this tool, the whole concept of the ABT framework. And what's emerged now that's in these books has come not from us reading a whole bunch of books on theory and diving into the world of psychology and assembling some great big, convoluted theory. It's only come from one thing, which is practical experience, which is I've done over 500 of these ABT builds. And it's through that repetition. It's through the iteration over and over. It's that faraway gaze thing. The reason I talk about it in there is I've seen it, probably 100 times at least with the people. When you get to that thing, what is the one problem you're working on here? And then they go into the faraway gaze. And so that doesn't come from some theorizing. It is all arising out of real world practical experience. And I think that's at the core of everything that we preach here, which is that you just got to get out there and experience the real world. And too many people live their lives nowadays in this non-real world. It's like when I went to film school at USC and began to realize all these youngsters in my film school class, all 21, 22, all their scripts that they were writing were not based on any real world experiences. They were based on other movies they've seen, and they were trying to tell those sorts of stories, and they just weren't drawing on the real world. But in the end, for things to have truth to them, they really need to draw from that. And so I think that's one of the stronger attributes of what we've been doing with this. And that's what you're bringing from the legal world.
And so totally. And I will tell you that, so first of all, overwhelmingly positive response so far from the book. And granted, it's all my friends and my mother and my dad who listened to it, who have watched it,
critics.
read it. Well, my mom's not the toughest critic. She'll, and I could do no wrong with her.
She's
But
part of the inner group.
right, she's my inner circle. But everybody, no, seriously, everybody loves it. And I'm not just sharing this with lawyers because I have people that I know are swimming in story water. So, for example, I shared it with a friend who was a journalist in a former life and who's in the entertainment industry now. But the only feedback that I've been getting that leads me to believe there's more to explain here is I feel like maybe people are taking this a little too literally in terms of the use of the specific language of and, but, and therefore. So I've had one person go, well, it seems like it's going to be a run-on sentence if I say and. I'm like, well, you don't have to do it just like that. You could do like regular sentence. The and, it's sort of implied. That's why we capitalize it in the book every time. And then one person said the therefore. I was always taught in TV. This is my journalist friend. I was always taught in TV to keep it conversational. So if you say therefore, it doesn't seem conversational. And I think people maybe just
that leads into a whole discussion. I don't know if we put it into that version of the book, but the more conversational word is so. And then we had people early on say, you should call this thing the end, but so, well, no, there's much deeper dimensions to that, which is therefore is a very powerful word. It's not the most common word, but it's powerful. And that's why we've had that discussion a lot on and on. Let me tell you one little parallel to what you're talking about there that I think you'll be able to savor the value of this. About 4 or 5 years ago, I was back in Boston and went to dinner with a woman who was a fellow graduate student with me. And she's now a professor at Harvard in biology, and her husband, Phil, is a professor in physics at MIT. And Colleen and Phil, I was explaining to them the ABT, and actually Colleen had me come talk to her lab and explain the ABT to our graduate students, and they all picked up immediately, and they were all thrilled, and she was thrilled. There we were at dinner, and so there's Phil, the superstar physicist, listening to this whole thing. And then he says, I like it, but let me ask you one question. If I put the ABT on the weekly quiz, how many points do I assign to the and? How many points to the but? How many points to the therefore? And Colleen turned to him and said, Phil, that's not how you do this all the time. And there's the hyper analytical physicist mind breaking it down, particularizing everything. And so you get these people that go off in these different directions like that, where they get too literal about it, who knows what. But with time, they pick it up, and there's the overall gestalt to it that you just kind of have to roll with that. And I think we're at the point now where, as a matter of fact, the round of the course that we just finished, without even mentioning who this group was very smart scientists. And for the first time ever, we got, before the round even began, we got a 2-page critique of the entire course from a person who was going to be in the course. And we looked at that like, this has never happened before. We've gotten our evaluation before we even started. And then the point person, after the second of 10 sessions, did the same thing, wrote us a 2-page critique of where we were, and you need to be doing this, that, and the other thing. And then I had Mike Strauss, who's my official diplomat, wrote a very diplomatic email back and just basically said, trust us, just take a deep breath, roll with it. We can't address everything in the first 2 sessions. You've got to have a little bit of confusion here at the beginning. That's the arouse and fulfill process. This is arousing your brain, confused, wanting to know, and trusting us that we will eventually iron that out. And lo and behold, by the 10th session, she wrote us back, semi-apology email, like, oh my God, you're right. It did all come clear. It just takes that iteration slowly, but surely. You can't learn this stuff in one day. And so we've dealt with that dynamic. And that's a little bit of what you're talking about. Some of these people in their first exposure going off in the wrong directions. And in some ways, all you can say is just hang in there, work on it some more. And these things will start through simplicity and iteration. They'll start to become clear. That's the greatest hope of all, is the simplicity of it all. And then knowing that the clarity comes through repetition and iteration, using it. It's not something you can pick up immediately. And on that note, we're gonna wrap this thing up here, because even though we've only just gotten started, this is part 1 of, and nice. I'm going to do the same thing, I think, with the politics book. And I think we're going to have Park as one of our guests in the very near future to talk about that version of the book. We can fill a bunch of episodes like this. And I know Jen will have plenty of questions each time we bring these folks back, right, Jen?
Oh, absolutely. I'm just loving the fact that, as you say, dude, it's just one story. Love it. We can all agree it's just one story. But the key thing is the persuasiveness to work out how to bring each audience into realizing it's just one story, right? So us as team ABT, how do we convince the politics world or the business world or the lawyer, the legal world, who may be kind of on the outer edge saying, oh, I don't think this ABT has anything to offer me. How do we convince them? Just trust us. It really does. Just start listening.
Well, and and this is going to sound like, I mean, Doug got to toot his horn about his Simpsons encounter. Last week, there is an annual Christmas lecture given at Oxford University. And the woman who gave the lecture last week gave it on storytelling, I think in science. And in the little synopsis thing, she had a sentence in there that, you saw it, didn't you, Jen? She said,
no, tell me.
Oh God, it went around on Twitter, and she began her little thing, and she said, from Joseph Campbell to Randy Olson, yada yada yada. Exactly.
You've made it, Randy. You've done it.
I would not put myself in the same company with him on the one hand. On the other hand, there's a similarity, which is that he introduced the monomyth template and has been beaten up a lot over the years with everybody saying this is too reductionist, it's too simplistic, it ignores all these things, it's making the world horrible, blah blah blah. And then conversely, it gets this generality and shows how ubiquitous this stuff is. It's the same thing we're doing with the ABT. It's a more condensed version of the monomyth, basically. And we get the same thing, which is, a lot of the humanities people despise this. Park has his anecdote about the woman who said, this is reductionist and insulting. And so you get all this blowback, but what it's doing on a daily basis is helping so many people. And this round that we just finished, that group is, oh God. As a matter of fact, last thing to mention is we're putting together something now that I think we're going to launch in January. And Jen, you'll want to be a part of this. I think we're calling it the ABT Ambassadors. And it's going to be a small group of the people that have taken the course and really gotten it and are out there propagating the stuff. And we've got a woman from EPA who just was in the course and she's on fire about it. So she's probably going to head this up. Matt and I had a chat with her a little while ago. And so we'll be building this and launching it in January, but it'll be a central focal point now to pull together a lot of these people that are really getting it, seeing it all over the place. That's what we need to start doing, is building kind of the snowball element to it. So on that note, and Doug, there's another 2 to 3 hours we could go through of stuff right now, but thank you so much for diving in on the whole deal. And you're such a good spokesperson for this. And I think there's a lot to come in the world of law. So by a month from now, you're going to have tons more stories. Any final little thought you want to share with us before we exit for the holidays?
No, just to say I'm proud to be a part of Team ABT. And so thank you, Jen, and thank you, Randy. I'm excited for this,
Matt,
this journey. Matt. I think we're at the front end, and thank you, Matt. Definitely. Thank you, Matt, who we all know is the brains and the backbone behind this operation. Exactly. But I think we're at the front end of this journey, and I'm very excited. I fully expect it to be a whole lot of death and resurrection and Campbell-esque trials and tribulations, but I'm so excited to be on this ride with you guys. So thank you.
Yeah, well, Doug, in public, we call it Team ABT. Between ourselves, we all recognize that it's cult ABT. So just so you know what you're in for.
Cool, man. I've never been in a cult unless you count the Simpsons.
Right. Yeah,
All
but
right.
as Liz says, we regret to inform you, there's no money, there's no charisma, and there's no murdering. So it's not a real cult in that regard, but we try our best.
Maybe I can change that. I won't tell you which one.
Tune in a month from now. He's the guy who brought it all in. And on that note, good luck to everybody with the upcoming Omicron season. Let's hope it's not what everybody's fearing in terms of its severity, and happy holidays to all. And I think this will be our last episode before the holidays. We will start again in the new year. So Jen, have yourself a happy little holiday season down there, and looking forward to whenever we regroup for episode 31. And thank you, Doug. We'll talk to you again in a month or so.
Thanks, y'all.
Okay. Happy holidays. Bye-bye.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Thanks again.